at Bajaj Auto. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Dinesh, if I were to come to you, give us a sense of whether you foresee an immediate uptick in sales as a result of this GST reduction on motorcycles and two-wheelers under 350cc. And is this going to be a sustained growth that we are going to see, or will this be a one-time uptick?
Thank you, Parikshit, for having me on the show. At the outset, let me say that the reduction of the GST rate from 28% to 18% for two and three wheelers is a very welcome move. It's been a long-standing request of the industry for the government to consider a reduction of rates, given how integral two and three wheelers have been in enabling personal mobility, employment, and enhancing livelihood. So to that extent, this is a very welcome move. And even though the reduction to the 18% as it is being envisaged, and we'll wait and see what comes through in the council meetings of tomorrow and day after. But even though at the 18% is higher than, let me say, what comparable economies with large two-wheeler economies across the world are, which are fundamentally in the range of between 8 to 15%, the reduction from 28 to 18 is absolutely the right direction of change and very, very welcome. In terms of what this will do to industry demand, I think we're very optimistic. The whole industry was very optimistic about the upcoming festive season. And the last couple of weeks, ever since the intent was announced to reduce GST rates, we've obviously seen some slowing down of retail. Obviously, as customers have picked up news of an impending GST reduction and therefore a reduction of vehicle rates or prices as they were, once those were notified. And so there's been some deferment of demand that we have seen in these last couple of weeks, which we hope will get made up and recouped, once there is clarity of rates, once it's notified and announced and brought into effect. But that said, August and September are big months for the industry, because clearly there is a lot of front loading in of inventory into the pipeline in anticipation of a big festive. And the festive season for the industry has only become larger and larger with each year. And so therefore, in anticipation of a large festive, a lot of that has been going in. And we therefore hope that this deferment of demand that we've seen or offtake that we've seen from customers in the last couple of weeks gets made up through an even bigger festive season that we start to see later towards the end of September and as we get into October. From a long-term perspective, right, I think this should provide a boost clearly to consumer sentiment for the two-wheeler customer, a reduction of anywhere between 6,000 to, let me say, 12, 13,000, depending on the CC, but really in the belly of the market between the 100 to the 200 CC. That is fairly relevant given the profile of the two-wheeler customer. And therefore, we think that this reduction in the GST rate as it is passed on in lower pricing to customers should help stimulate some demand. And I can only hope that this entire benefit flows to customers and it's not offset by any of the states, let's say, increasing, state roads taxes or any other cesses coming in and being bought to really make up revenue across the state. So the entirety of the benefit flowing through, I think...
Dinesh, when you speak about long-term benefit and demand, could you once again tell us what is the engine capacity where you expect the demand to come in from the consumer on a sustained and long-term basis?
So I think there's a nuance to that because, about half the market, 47% of this market sits between the 100, 110 cc, very, very price conscious customer out there, very value conscious. Clearly, that 5,000-6,000 rupees is going to make a big difference. But there are two nuances that I wanted to call out from a longer term perspective. I think first is that for the customer, a saving of between 6 to 12 or 13,000 will also help stimulate a thought to uptrade. And uptrade a customer who is looking at maybe 100, 110 cc to start looking at an early 125 cc. Someone sitting at a baseline 125 cc model, looking at a slightly feature-rich 125, a 125 looking at a 150, and potentially because the gap across some of these ranges between 10 to 15,000, a saving of anywhere between 6 to 12 could really prompt customers to look to uptrade. So I think in some ways, in addition to the demand that we're looking at, you could also see the possibility of a relative premiumization that this entire move could stimulate. So that's one
All
immediate
right.
piece. But to your question, I think you will see a Russian in demand that we will see in this upcoming festive season, because festive seasons are in any case meant to be much larger. They are anywhere between 60 to 70% higher than the normal run rate for the rest of the year. And then with clearly deferment of offtake having happened in the last couple of weeks and possibly in the next couple of days till such time rates are notified, this should make it a much bigger festive season as we look forward. Having said that, I think
Right.
there's one
Dinesh,
more
I'm going to come back to you. I'm just going to come back to you. Let me also get in Rajiv Chaba on the sentiment for cars, especially the industry is divided on as to how larger cars, larger EVs, hybrids should be treated. Mr. Chaba, welcome to the program. What's your sense? This is a big move, and these rate rationalization exercises are not easy. They're happening after a lot of deliberation. The Prime Minister has announced GST reforms from the ramparts of the Red Fort. We're looking at a 5% rate for EVs, 18% for small cars and cars and motorcycles under 350cc, and a 40% rate for luxury cars. How do you see this as something that will benefit electric mobility and clean mobility in the long term?
Right. So thanks, Parikshit. I think in general, it's a very welcome move that the government has decided to rationalize the duties and especially reduce the duties on the smaller cars. And that was the basic idea what was announced. But after that announcement, a lot of speculation is going on that what will happen to small cars, big cars, and some of the other issues which you mentioned. Let me just say for the context that actually there used to be excise duty structure which was based on the size of the car and the CC, the engine size. That's how it was started, and then GST grandfathered that without much changes. At this point of time, when we are talking about reforms and Viksit Bharat and for future, I think it should not be just based on size of the car and the CC of the engine. Life has changed, things have changed, technology has changed, world has moved on. So I think, in my opinion, it's a great opportunity for India that we need to really see the holistic thing in view of what's good for environment, what's good for country, and what's good for consumer, and then what's good for OEM in that sequence. So from that perspective, the car's pricing should be seen as good price for consumer and the right technology for consumers. So from that perspective, in small cars, as an example, because that was the starting point of this GST thing. So small cars, when the GST gets reduced, as an example, which is what speculated is that from 28% to 18%, which I think is a great idea, but then EV is 5%. So it means relatively you are making EV cars disadvantageous versus the ICE cars. So in that case, I think because EV penetration still is only 2% or 3% based on various segments of the car, then EV should be made 0%, so that there is no disincentive for the consumer to buy a small EV. So that's for the small car. Now, when we talk about the bigger cars, and again, I think everything is speculated right now that it may be 40%, but in some cars, as you know, right now the duty with cess is 46% to 48%. And then we are talking about, some guys talk about hybrid technology, what should be the GST structure on that. But there are new emerging technologies which are very much prevalent and widespread as transition to EV, like plug-in hybrid, and the REEV, which is range extender. So I think then this is a great time for India to rationalize not only the duty structure, but also bring the right technology at the right price to consumer to set the tone for our auto industry.
All right, that's an important point. Let me get in Dinesh Thapar once again. Dinesh, we've seen how Siddharth Lal, the chairman of Eicher Motors, has gone on record to make an urgent appeal that we should not have a differential rate for motorcycles, and we should not have a high rate of 40% for motorcycles above 350cc, because you're going to hurt the middleweight segment. Of course, Royal Enfield is a leader there, but companies like Bajaj Auto, TVS, Honda, Hero Honda, Honda motorcycles, they are making forays into that space and want to gain a big market share. What would be your appeal to the government, especially as far as the GST proposed rates for bigger bikes are concerned?
We've been very clear, and we've called out clearly a situation where we would like a unified rate structure across all of motorcycles, irrespective of their engine displacement, right? So the whole piece on that we've been hearing about moving the taxation up to 40% for upwards of 350cc really has no plausible reason. It's 1% of the industry at this point of time, and that's the part of the industry that all of us as OEMs are just about foraying into. Clearly, a lot of technology going in over there, a lot of portfolio expansion, a lot of innovation happening in that space. Let's not forget that, the domestic or the Indian two-wheeler industry is very successful worldwide and globally, and in many ways a shining example of the Make in India, purely because there was a large domestic industry that was built over here, which allowed for scale and cost competitiveness that could then get translated to the world over, and therefore we ourselves, export across to 100 countries. Now that was because there was clearly a large domestic business that allowed for investments, in innovation and technology and building the ecosystem. And so therefore, to really bring in a differential rate for the 350cc upwards is really going to create unnecessary complexity. It's going to distort customer choices. We should leave the choice to the customer depending on, the product that they want, what's right for them and what's right for their need, and not really distorted by the tax structure, which forces them to look for, let's say, an under 350cc vehicle when they very clearly could have afforded a 350cc in the past regime. And then, of course, in many ways, it could end up stifling investment, because then the 350cc upwards relative to what will move down from 28 to 18% starts to become very uncompetitive. Scale doesn't build, investment gets stifled. And that's really the part of the industry that the Indian two-wheeler industry at this point of time is looking to tap into, to build both a large domestic base as well as an international presence. And that clearly is a segment which is very relevant to global markets. A lot of the markets the world over is where you see motorcycles which are upwards of 400cc in that space. And that's the one where the Indian OEMs really need to really participate in that part of the opportunity. We've been tremendously successful, whether it's across Asia, Latin America, South Asia, or parts of Southeast Asia. Those are largely in motorcycles between the 100 to 200cc, because we've been able to build domestic scale with a very stable tax regime. And I think that's something we need to do with the 350cc. And lastly, I think the fact that the 350cc up today, the segment is all of 1% of volume. So there's really no plausible reason why it should be put up into the 40% tax bracket. It's not going to get significant additional revenues for the government. It's going to stifle industry and investment. And lastly, to put it into the 40% bracket is to give it the color of luxury. It isn't luxury. A 400cc motorcycle today is very much adopted across the country by people who go to work. We've got a bunch of folks who come into office and come into workplaces riding a 400cc speed in a scrambler. And that's definitely not luxury. It's a necessity. It's very much part of their daily commute and in many ways part of their livelihoods and employment. So really the reason for it to get classified into 40% is neither plausible on grounds of it being luxury nor on account of revenue, being a sizable pool of GST, because it's all 1% for the industry.
Okay.
But to retain a uniform tax structure allows OEMs like ourselves and the rest of the industry to really be able to invest in the cutting edge technology and to really build that segment, not just domestically, but once we build it domestically, we're now at that tipping point to then extend this out to the rest of the world where the 350cc upwards is very, very relevant.
All right.
So,
Dinesh, we've completed our time, but my last question to Mr. Rajiv Chhabra. Mr. Chhabra, what would be your appeal? Now, the GST Council will be meeting tomorrow and day after. Decisions are likely to be taken very soon ahead of Navratri. What would be your final appeal to the government? For example, MG Motor is coming out not just with EVs, you're coming out with luxury EVs, which would be above 50 lakhs. You're looking at strong hybrid cars as well. What would be your appeal to the government at this stage?
So frankly, from my perspective, I would not say really GSW MG only, from my perspective as an industry veteran here and being an oldie in the auto industry, I would say a government needs to, the purpose of the government is to increase the size of the industry, increase the revenue, and also, give that fillip to the auto industry. And they want to generate demand by reducing the GST. Their idea is not segment substitution, that the guys shift from high-end cars to mid-end cars to low-end cars. Idea is to increase the pie. If that's the objective, and I'm just requesting government that combine the objective of the right technology also at the right price, because and right technology, government has already stated that EV is the desired goal, and that's what is the direction from the climate perspective and the long-term perspective from India too, to minimize the carbon footprint. So the request to the government would be, keep it simple, do not mess with the structures of various segments. Let consumers choose that. But when you are reducing the GST duty on a particular segment, the relative duty across the segment should be maintained, and the advantage to EV or the forthcoming technologies, which are kind of transition technologies to EV, like plug-in hybrid and REEV, should be maintained. So that's what I would tell the government. Keep it simple. Don't confuse customers by making some artificial barriers in their choice.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Chaba. And Dinesh Thapar, very important views ahead of the GST Council meeting. Let's see what happens now. We're taking a break on the program, but on the other side, Gurugram is down on its knees after barely 4 hours of torrential rains, raises questions about the city's so-called developmental model. I speak to prominent Gurugram residents Sohail Seth and Advaita Kala on the other sides.